With the water
We'll get
tank.
the microphone going
And then we
I'll...
can talk about, yeah, you can, yeah, okay. This way, this way. And Rick, you might want to come up here because you can put a little input into this, and Frank, if you want to. But talk about the agreement a little bit. Rick and I have been neighbors for a long time, and I've grazed cover crops on a lot of Rick's ground that he owns or he rents from other people's or whatever, but I usually have cows on something of his every year.
You know, if we're getting some benefit out of it on the agronomy side, and Bruce is getting some on the cattle side, I think it can be a good working relationship.
In this agreement, I am the grazer with the cattle. Rick is the row crop farmer, and he has row crops and wants to use cover crops. I've already been grazing corn crop residue, so we need to figure out how we can work cover crops into our whole relationship. There is no money exchange between what Rick and I are doing. I think in the future, there is probably a money exchange. There's probably a split on seed costs, application costs, and things like that, depending on if I get grazing or I don't get grazing. I think there's a lot of what ifs when you get into who's paying for what there, because everybody's getting benefits out of it.
This coming year, we're working with a couple of our neighbors, and I think we might get up to a half a section to work on cover crops for grazing in the fall, and they're strictly row crop farmers. And I gave them an offer if I would supply the cover crop seed, do all the work just to get my foot in the door. I don't have any intentions of paying a grazing fee to them. I think by me supplying the cover crop seed, that it removes some of their risk of letting me try it.
At times, the farmer says, well, the contribution simply from the manure application, the hoof impact, those types of things is enough, and I don't need a rent payment on that land for that because you're giving me free fertility by managing your cattle. But there are also arrangements where the grazer values that grazing opportunity enough that they are willing to pay a rent on top of that, on top of providing you fertility. So for many farmers, it means that in the off season, you can still go do whatever you want to do and have that livestock impact on your land and be generating passive revenue in those rent payments from your row crop acres. And next spring, when you go to plant your crop, all the cattle are removed, the water resources are removed, and all the fencing is removed, and you're free to go back unimpeded to farm your land.
There's 4 or 5 main things that you talk about when you talk about grazing, and the top 5 are fence, water, who's managing the cattle, and a liability, insurance probably, and all those are mine. They're my cattle. I'll take care of them. I'll take care of the fence. I do the water. I manage the cattle. Compaction is probably the next one, and Rick doesn't like compaction. It affects his crop yields and his planting the next year. So when you throw cover crops into it, I think there's some more things that you start needing to talk about, like what mix are you going to put in? What's the grazing dates? When do you want cows in? When are you going to terminate the cover crop? When do I have to have the cows out? There's just a whole gamut of things. How far down do you graze it before you pull the cows off? And because he's putting the cover crop in for say erosion control and water quality, and I'm using it to feed cows. So we have kind of different mindsets of how much I should eat before I move cows and things like that. So there's just a number of things out here that you need to talk about and talk through so you're both on the same page when you start doing this type of agreement and relationship.
However, there's one thing that you have to seriously consider here that impacts both the success of the cover crop and the success of that grazer and their ability to be able to legally graze that cover crop. And that is the use of your chemicals or herbicides on your land. So there are publications out there from the University of Wisconsin. There's publications from Penn State University, from Michigan State University, and Iowa State, and several others that cover different withdrawal periods for livestock grazing, for many of the different common herbicides that are used. And I would highly recommend that you take a look at those resources and make sure that if you're considering grazing, allowing grazers to come in and graze cover crops on your land, that you're not using herbicides that are disallowed for grazing. That's something that you absolutely have to think about. The other is you have to consider herbicides that are going to impair germination and growth of specific cover crop species. So both of those are things that you have to think about in making your herbicide choices.
There's some good examples online to how to write leases on these things. The Greenlands Blue Waters website is one place you can go to get some sample leases if this is something you're interested in. But we're getting more and more farmers to do this. They're seeing the benefit of it. It's a win-win deal, both for the crop farmer and the livestock producer. It's just a matter of sitting down, finding somebody you can work with, a friend, a neighbor, that you can work with, and working out the details on how you're going to make this happen for both of you.